The rain outside the smoked glass windows of the high-rise office building fell in a steady, rhythmic murmur, casting long, liquid shadows across the polished mahogany floor. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a heavy silence broken only by the soft hum of the internal ventilation system and the frantic, hushed whispers of a woman standing near a public telephone in the lobby. Her name was Doris Grady, and her fingers trembled as she held the receiver tight against her ear, her eyes darting nervously toward the row of silent security guards stationed near the main elevators. On the other end of the line, Tom Lochner, an investigator working out of the office of the United States Attorney, adjusted his earpiece. His face was etched with deep concern as he listened to the panicked breathing of the woman on the phone. "All the pieces, Tom," Doris said, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper as she leaned closer to the coin-operated box. "I have got proof. Actual proof this time. My peerless leader, Mr. McKenna himself, he is involved in a criminal conspiracy, and it is heavy. It goes higher than anyone imagined." "All right, Doris, give me what you have," Tom replied calmly, pulling a blank yellow notepad toward himself and unstriking his pen. "Take a deep breath and tell me what you found out." "The complications, Tom. It is close to unbelievable," she continued, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "If you only knew the scope of what they are planning with the international holdings and the mining contracts." Before she could finish her sentence, a cold, calculated voice echoed through a set of heavy headphones inside a dark surveillance room located 3 floors above her. A technician seated before a massive console of reel-to-reel tape decks looked up at a tall, impeccably tailored man standing quietly in the shadows. "Hold a second, please," the technician murmured, pointing to a glowing red VU meter on the control panel. "Can you monitor a public telephone from this junction?" "We have intercepts on every line in or out of the building, sir," the tall man answered smoothly. His name was Don Corcoran, a former military officer whose calm demeanor masked a ruthless efficiency. His eyes remained fixed on the glowing visual monitors displaying the lobby. "All right, record the call. Every single word." The technician flipped a series of heavy toggle switches, and the magnetic tape began to spin with a high-pitched whir. Corcoran stepped closer to the console, his voice dropping to a flat, emotionless tone as he leaned over the technician's shoulder. "If she begins to say anything dangerous, jam the connection immediately," Corcoran instructed coldly. "And if Miss Grady intends any serious action against us, I am afraid you'll have to terminate her." Down in the bustling commercial alley behind the office complex, the golden neon sign of Westland Liquors flickered against the damp brick walls. Doris Grady burst through the rear exit door of the building, her heels clicking rapidly against the wet pavement as she clutched a leather folder to her chest. She looked frantically left and right, her pulse racing as the shadows of the alley seemed to stretch toward her. "Westland Liquors." She gasped into her portable recording unit as she ran toward the streetlight. "West." A sudden figure lunged from the darkness of a side entryway. A short, brutal struggle ensued in the dim light. A harsh scream cut through the evening air, followed by the heavy thud of a body striking the damp concrete. Footsteps hurried away into the night, leaving behind only the sound of dripping rainwater and a shattered pair of reading glasses lying in a puddle. Hours later, inside a brightly lit private office, Frank Cannon sat back in a heavy leather armchair, his formidable frame casting a large shadow against the wood-paneled wall. Across from him stood Tom Lochner, looking tired and pale under the harsh overhead fluorescent lights. Frank leaned forward, his sharp eyes examining the smaller man with a mixture of sympathy and intense professional focus. "Your face was badly scratched by Doris Grady," Frank observed quietly, pointing a thick finger toward the dark red marks lining Tom's cheek. "They set me up, Mr. Cannon," Tom said, his voice cracking with emotion as he paced back and forth across the Persian rug. "They put me in a box. I did not do it. I did not do anything. I could not do anything. I am not a man anymore, Mr. Cannon. I am impotent, obstinate, and a very super lady in their eyes now. They have completely stripped away my authority and my reputation in one single night." I understand how you feel, Tom, Frank said softly, his deep voice carrying a comforting weight as he gestured for the younger man to sit down. It is a classic frame job, neatly executed by professionals. But you have to stay focused. Why did you call me specifically? Because of what Doris said right before the line went dead, Tom explained, leaning across the desk, his hands clasped tightly together. She said she had proof that the man she worked for, Bud McKenna, was involved with something criminal and big. Something that reaches far beyond a simple corporate merger. But I do not want to talk to Gordon yet. Not yet. Not till this is all over. Not with what you tell me about these men, these private investigators working the perimeter. Cannon and Jones? Frank asked with a faint, knowing smile. Tom nodded slowly, rubbing his tired eyes. Relax, Bud, he muttered to himself, recalling the arrogant tone of the executives he had encountered earlier. They messed up letting Doris find that memo in the first place. But as far as they are concerned, it is covered. Inside the opulent executive suite of International Redevelopment, Incorporated, Gordon McKenna stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sprawling cityscape below. He was a man accustomed to absolute authority, dressed in a bespoke three-piece suit that understated his immense wealth. In his hand, he held a silver telephone receiver. "He is expecting our call, Gordon," said Don Corcoran, standing near the door with his hands neatly folded behind his back. Gordon raised the receiver to his ear, his face softening into a practiced, charismatic smile that did not reach his eyes. "Oh, Bud, hello," Gordon said smoothly into the mouthpiece. "It is good to hear your voice. I've got an old friend of yours here right now, Matt Vanner, who is still refusing to sell us his company." On the other side of the spacious office, a silver-haired man named Matt Vanner sat rigidly in a leather guest chair, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked at Gordon with a look of quiet, unyielding defiance. "Nothing personal, Gordon," Matt Vanner said clearly, his voice carrying the rugged determination of a man who had spent his life working the earth. "But Montana Uranium is my baby. I built it from the ground up with my own 2 hands. Our is big enough to buy the whole state of Montana if it wants to. Just leave me my little bit." "Still refusing, Mr. Vanner?" Gordon asked, turning away from the window with a slight eyebrow raised. "Hey, still holding out," Matt Vanner replied with a rough chuckle, though his eyes remained sharp and watchful. "But I am not giving up that easily. Matt, I am ready to sweeten the deal considerably," Gordon said, stepping toward his massive mahogany desk and picking up a gold-plated pen. "We can double the initial stock allocation. There is not enough sugar in all those Hawaiian acres of yours to make me sign over my life work," Matt said firmly, standing up from his chair and smoothing his jacket. Before Gordon could respond, the heavy double doors of the office swung open, and a young woman stepped into the room. She possessed a striking presence, her eyes flashing with a combination of deep grief and fierce independence. This was Laura Vanner, Matt's daughter. "What is it?" Matt asked, turning to his daughter in surprise. "Trolls," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly as she held a sheath of legal documents in her hand. "My father is dead, Mr. McKenna. I have faced that reality today. And the fact that I have inherited his entire voting share block in our company. I know I made him an offer before he passed." "More than just an offer, Miss Vanner," Gordon replied smoothly, stepping around the desk with an open hand extended in sympathy. "We had a number of very good meetings with your late father. We respected him immensely. I will look over this written offer," Laura said coolly, ignoring the extended hand and placing the documents neatly on the table between them. "But frankly, I do not think we are going to be interested. Not now and not in the future." Gordon watched her walk out of the office, his eyes narrowing into thin slits as the door clicked shut behind her. He turned to Corcoran, who remained standing silently near the bookshelf. "I thought, sure, with him gone," Gordon began, his voice dropping an octave. "You underestimated the power of genetic inheritance," Corcoran noted dryly. "Well, the Vanners are an unlucky family overall. Laura is no mining expert. An accident is not unlikely in a field as hazardous as high-yield uranium extraction. In a small, poorly lit apartment on the other side of town, a man named Miller sat at a kitchen table, his hands shaking violently as he poured cheap whiskey into a cloudy glass. The phone on the wall rang incessantly, its sharp bell cutting through the silence of the room. "He will not accept your call," Miller gasped into the receiver, his breath smelling heavily of liquor.
"What?"
"I told him you were already half-souse. Cordy set you up. His own secretary. His own lousy secretary was a spy. Well, you can tell him for me that if he will not accept my call. The next one will be directly from the police department. Now, get out. Get out of my house." "But
he did do it, Dad,"
a young voice cried out from the hallway.
"Help God."
Help God. The man named Bud McKenna stood inside his 23rd floor office suite, his face pale as chalk as he stared at the heavy oak doors that had just been locked from the outside. He must have been desperate, his mind racing as he looked at the thick, reinforced safety glass of the massive exterior window that overlooked the concrete plaza far below. "His safety glass is hard to break," Barnaby Jones remarked quietly hours later, leaning down to inspect the jagged shards lying scattered across the carpet of the empty office. He adjusted his glasses, his keen eyes scanning the frame. "Watch your eyes, Frank." Frank Cannon stepped carefully around a pool of clear, pungent liquid near the windowsill. "Acid," Frank declared, sniffing the air cautiously from a safe distance. "Either fuming nitric or a high-concentration type of hydrofluoric acid. A man facing an imminent indictment for murder might commit suicide," Barnaby pondered, crouching down to brush a gloved finger against the frame. But he would not bother to weaken his own office windows with heavy industrial acid first, just to make his leap easier. "But all of the evidence pointed directly to Bud McKenna," Frank noted, standing with his hands on his hips as he looked out at the skyline. "Then we will just have to look past him, dig out completely new evidence," Barnaby said grimly, standing up and dusting off his knees. "That is 3 murders now. Doris Grady, Matt Vanner, and now Bud McKenna himself. And we still do not know why this particular company is worth killing so many people for. McKenna had to hit that glass pretty hard to shatter it, even with the acid treatment," Frank observed. "He had to be pushed or thrown against it with immense physical force." "Pushed by whom?" Barnaby asked, turning his head toward the entrance. There was no one reported in the office at that hour, except his executive secretary, Alice Parks. "Alice Parks?" Frank repeated, his eyebrows rising. "The only other human being in the entire office suite at the time of the fall. And that is the exact reason you are going to investigate that lady, Frank." Barnaby turned toward his young associate, Betty, who had been quietly taking notes near the doorway. "You used to be a top-grade legal secretary, Betty," Barnaby said with a warm, encouraging smile.